Sorry. So I'm curious if there are any studies looking at the breakdown products from plastic wood composites.
So you mean
As it
what
rains
would
over
slough
time.
off or come off of? I don't think I've seen anything on that, to tell you the truth. So no.
Questions?
Hello. This question's for Susan. So rewind like a bunch of talks. I was wondering if you, or if there have been any studies or any research on what kind of leachates are we seeing from plastics that are not biodegradable that go through the entire composting process and that are then in our compost?
I have no idea that there are any studies done. So I guess I would throw it out to people that are in the compostable products industry. I mean, the point is that it breaks down completely in the composting process, but yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about that, or do I understand the question correctly?
I think, well, maybe I worded that confusingly. I'm thinking like of a fork that's not biodegradable and it goes through the whole process and has to be pulled out on the back end, but maybe there's additives in there that are...
To my knowledge, there have not been any studies done on that, so I unfortunately cannot be helpful on that.
This young lady has been waiting for a while.
And I'm going to cheat because I have two. A real quick one for Carl with WSU. You mentioned Remade with DOE. I just want to clarify, I believe that's Federal Department of Energy, that program, right? Involving many universities?
Yes, yeah, it's federal. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then for Katie, you mentioned a study that showed like a $300 billion burden from endocrine disruptors, and 56 of that, I think you said, from plastic lining in cans. Can you say a little bit more about how that study, who did that study, how they determined that?
That's work out of Leo Tressan's group at NYU, and I'm not an economist. I know that they tallied up the estimated burden for the diseases, and then they did some calculations that are way outside my fieldwork. Sorry.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I have a question about the artificial play fields we see these days, where the little black specks that come home in the clothing and the shoes and go into our wash and flow into our streams. And I'm just wondering what that is and how it gets passed in the environmental impact statement and all that jazz. Anybody have any idea what that is?
I think maybe a couple of us can talk to that. It was not a study that I was involved in, but I know that a lot of the artificial turf is derived from recycled tire rubber. And there's work from the National Toxicology Program and some, I think it was California, OEHA, that we're starting to study that. It's a big question right now.
Out of the artificial turf.
On your microphone. I'm curious. I listen to like Fox News, Rush Limbaugh. You might have heard of them. We hear about how regulations are bad for the economy, bad for business. But I see regulations as it could be a positive. Maybe some people from the board or from the panel here could talk about how regulations have helped spur innovation. Because like carbon fiber that we see on car parts now for body panels, that was because of the book Natural Capitalism, and one of the gentlemen there developed it so that it can make cars lighter, which better fuel economy, faster. So, doctor or anybody there?
Well, I think you're right. I agree 100%. Like in California, they have a certain percentage of the material for bags have to be made out of recycled. Part of the problem is I was part of a group of 22 blessed recyclers for General Motors, and we went back there, and they told us that they were going to make a lot of their stuff out of our recycled materials. The problem is once you leave the R&D field and the people that are the PR people, and you go into corporate purchasing, the world changes.
Lobbyists.
just like
the metal industry, you say, oh, we for the market on metal, and we want you to use metal instead of carbon fiber or hemp fiber, maybe? Could that be the reason why?
I'm not sure if that's the reason. I do know that, I agree with you that I'm not, big into having government in your business, but I think when it's necessary, we need to do it. But the biggest driver is the consumers. The Walmarts are listening. All the major corporations that I deal with are all listening. They understand the need for ethylene, propylene, and styrene and materials like that that are the majority of what our packaging is, needs to be recycled.
Other themes of regulation driving innovation?
So I did speak about the Bio-Preferred program. That is intended to drive this exact programs that will help the bioeconomy. Nice buzzword. Yet you have to be careful of the undesired consequences. Like, I just kind of nailed that, Doctor. I'm Dennis. Yeah. I mean, the unintended consequence of the Coke bottle, it may have been better to challenge Coke to get a 100% recycled bottle. Then it's locally produced, locally distributed, locally dealt with. But we have many programs. The Domestic Tire is a $5 million program which Cooper, Bridgestone, Firestone are all playing together because they receive $5 million to play together to make a tire that's domestically produced, all natural. So a lot of these programs can work.
Thank you.
Other questions? We got one in the back there.
Question for Dr. Pelch. With BPA, how exactly is that absorbed into the body? And if it's absorbed through, let's say, the fingers, for example, what's the safe threshold for how many times you can handle the receipt tape before you get poisoned?
Yes, just pass on your receipt. Gosh, I'm not a pharmacological scientist. I know that the BPA that is on the thermal receipt paper, it is free BPA, so it's metabolized differently than if you ingest it orally, and so it doesn't undergo the same clearance and glucuronidation. So I think that your internal dose is higher, but I'm not sure what the threshold is. Take a digital receipt.
So Bill, following up on your comments a moment ago about tires, the new program that you mentioned very briefly is what toxicity are we expecting out of those tires? Like, is it in terms of I know that Bill, I know that tires right now are very toxic. Is the new one that you're working on not having all those additives? I mean, it needs to have performance.
So I'm not going to answer that really well because I don't really know how tires are made. So tires have 3 major ingredients and then a whole bunch more and then steel belts. And they don't really tell us all the other ingredients. So the 3 major ingredients are rubber, and it can be synthetic or natural, which is close to polybutadiene, carbon black, and silicas, right, sand. And that is only 80 to 85% of the tire. And then the rest is a free-for-all. That makes it special. There's a thing called vulcanization that cross-links the rubber that adds sulfurs and all sorts of other things. So all we're saying is if you get the carbon black out, you at least are not having carbon black in your little black bits that are by the side of the road. And the rest, good luck. More regulation. I don't know.
Yeah, this is for Dennis. With the China ban coming up, I was just wondering what your capacity is at your facility for all of the Washington plastics.
That's a good question. It depends on, of course, we've been getting enormous amounts of calls recently because in Portland, I don't know what it's like in Seattle, but all the MRFs are getting backed up tremendously. And a lot of the people, and the MRFs did a great job going out and collecting different types of stuff. They competed against us where we had set people up to separate their plastic out. The MRFs would say, well, just put your paper and your cardboard and your plastic. We'll take care of that. Well, now it's coming back. Albertsons is one that's come back to us. And now we're taking all their plastic that they're going through the separation. But we have plenty of capacity. Material recovery facility.
This is a question for Susan. I was wondering, you mentioned this and maybe I missed it on the slide, but like, what's the time period you would consider compostable? How fast should it break down?
Okay, so it's technology driven, and that's really what we're trying to match up with lab standards for compostability. So for instance, having come from Cedar Grove, that's a 60-day system that gets hot very fast. Yet you might have an aerated static pile system that's not covered, and that might hit 10 or 15 degrees lower temperatures, and that's 47 days to 60 days. Windrow, which is a lot of the capacity in the US, is long and cooler. So what we're trying to do is sync up to the sweet spot where all those technologies can hopefully better inform us on what's compostable in the greatest number of systems. So to answer that question, it would have to be a technology-driven answer from CMA's perspective.
Thank you.
So let me just add to the answer real quick. ASTM is getting involved in this, in legal definitions of what is compostable and biodegradable. And in fact, ASTM has only gotten to 2 of the systems, so you can't really, there's an industrial compostable ASTM standard, but not a yard compostable. So the whole thing is, can you put it on a label and say this is legally compostable? And actually, there isn't for most products. That's reassuring. So now advertisers can just put it on anything, and they're not legally challenged. Once there's an ASTM standard, then the label can be defended.
Yeah, one over here.
Yeah, I was wondering what your perception is in terms of public willingness to pay more, especially in your recycling and reusing and trying to clean up better and so forth. There will be a lot of added cost. I was just wondering what you guys found.
Well, just based on the little bit of experience I had, nobody's willing to pay more. If you remember back, I don't know, I remember because I'm an old guy, but you used to go into the grocery store and they had one aisle that's beautiful white paper, and then they had the other aisle, which was all recycled. It was all tan and brown, and it was okay, but it just cost a little bit more. But if you wanted to be, really an environmentalist, you bought from that one. Well, that lasted about 18 months and it went away. And it just goes to show you, like the remark I made about General Motors. They don't call them Generous Motors for nothing.
Yeah, I think I can talk about it now. I'm just curious, from all of your different perspectives, what do you think are some simple things that would decrease contamination for post-consumer waste collection, recycling, or compost? I know you have kind of an industrial perspective, you're going to do one thing there. Is there anything that crosses over, or what are the key messages you want for decreased contamination?
If you are a manufacturer producer, ask yourself if the additive needs to be in something. Really, really ask yourself. I mean, cereal box has BHT, endocrine disruptor. Does your cereal box really need to have these ingredients that you add as preservatives that are going to be persistent antimicrobials or plasticizers? So if you can get away without it, you get away without it. Anchor Steam Beer is making a beer board now that doesn't have all the nasty coatings, and it actually is a beer box that will degrade and go into compost, rather than your typical beer board that will never, never, never break down in most beer box is the bane of all existence. So ask yourself, is the ingredient really, really necessary, especially if it's an antibiotic?
From a composting perspective, I think contamination-wise is just think about the entry points of where contamination comes in, and this is my biggest thing. Residentially, most of what comes in that goes in the bin that shouldn't came through the grocery store. So why can't we get together, or why can't everybody here that goes to their grocery store say, you know, when you have that plastic piece on the zucchini to give it another 14 days of shelf life, maybe we could have signs at the grocery store that explain that that's plastic and it has to go in the garbage. I just think thinking where things first come in, what we call the upstream place. Where upstream does it enter? And it enters when we're shopping, and commercially it enters when we're buying. So if I'm a national company and I'm getting a deal on plates that have a plastic lining and somebody in Seattle has to buy them because it's under my contract, it's a supply chain issue. So I would just challenge us to go as far upstream as we can and educate people, because I think they care once they get it's a problem. So we need everybody to do their part to just get people talking about it, because I think people, big companies, brands, will actually make changes if they know about it. And these are really important events to start that conversation.
I think what William was kind of alluding to is the same thing I'm thinking about is there's a big part in this remade proposal or a concept on design for deconstruction. How do you design that initially so that whether it has contaminants or not, or how do I separate this thing out a little bit easier? Carpet's a perfect example of, how can we design that so it's a little bit easier to separate out. The other thing is education and outreach. The more you know, the more you'll be able to do that. And so those efforts need to be addressed too.
I don't know how many people are familiar with the Green Dot program in Germany, where they pushed back on the manufacturers and made it, you had to recycle. So I think that type of legislation would probably help somewhat here. I don't want it to get out of hand, but I mean, your car over there has to get recycled. You don't get their used car market's almost nil, because they're you got to recycle everything in it.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, one more question. Or
I got the mic.
two more questions. You have the mic. She's got the mic. Two more questions, and then we have cookies. Don't stop people from their cookies. Please.
Sorry, I'll be quick. No, well, as a consumer in general, I think I'm not alone in being a little overwhelmed with the recyclability of various types of plastic anyway. And then to top that, I live in a town that is a rural town that does a very poor job of recycling plastic. My options are limited in what I can put in recycling or what's actually taken. And so I wonder if you have any examples or advice for someone who was trying to make some changes of maybe some rural towns who really improved and how they did that, or anyone.
So right before my talk, I had a conversation with Chris Beatty about this exact same thing. And I've written a proposal about it. It hasn't got funded yet, but I'm going to work again on a rural recycling initiative. And how do you team up rural communities to make a bigger impact? How do you get co-ops going? How do you leverage the intel that you get from the larger cities, New York City, Seattle, and translate that to Pullman or your rural community? I think that's huge, because if you're not part of the solution and you feel kind of left out like we are in the rural communities, you're just not going to do it. And so I think that's a really big psychological push to get the rural communities feeling like they got some skin in the game and they'll actually get involved. And you can actually get them involved quicker and easier if they see some benefit to it. So we're working on it. I hear you talking, but it's going to take some time. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I live on an island. It's called Bowen Island, just off Horseshoe Bay, just off Vancouver. We have 75% waste diversion. Some of the Canadian Gulf Islands have 0% waste disposal. Zero. You're not allowed to throw anything out. I ran into a resident of one of the Gulf Islands, older guy, volunteer firefighter, age 78. He was getting on the ferry with a little backpack, and he said, "Don't tell anyone. I have a little plastic bag in the back of my backpack. I go once a month to Vancouver and throw it out. So the whole thing, I think, for the rural environment, I think the small communities on the islands know because they have to deal with landfill. As soon as you're limited, when your landfill costs money and you don't have land, you're forced into it. So I'd say the same is probably very much the case with San Diego.
All right, final question.
Yeah, one quick question. This is for Dennis and Susan on the issue of contamination. So you mentioned time and again about how this need for manufacturer to manufacturer communication, and also communication with the PR people within manufacturing companies. Are there any existing platforms for these conversations to happen, or do you see opportunities for this conversation to happen?
Well, I know they have a group called the APR, the Association of Plastic Recyclers, and they are really taking this up, and they deal with all the stakeholders. It's probably the best organization for recycling in the United States right now. And then there's groups, I don't know if you've heard of the Closed Loop Fund. It's a group and they're working with municipalities and with emerging technologies and with smaller companies to make sure things get done.
And I want to give a shout out to SPC, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition in Green Blue. For the first time, I think, in history, they're letting composters host the compostable packaging session. And we're going to have stakeholders from all four. So I definitely think groups are coming together to talk about it. You're welcome to get a hold of me and learn about a lot of other groups. WSRA here in our state is a great group to be part of. There's a lot of dialogue that goes on at those events. And I see a lot of collaboration. I just think we have to plug, all the holes of who's going where and why are we going there, and ask about the science too, because, that's a big part of this. So